The great hall in Addis Ababa shook with cameras clicking like rain. 13 bright African flags, South Africa, Ghana, Nigeria, Kenya, Tanzania, and 8 more, stood in a proud half-circle. In the middle, a long table glittered with folders stamped $60 billion US aid package. Donald Trump leaned forward, his famous red tie blazing. "Take the deal," he said, voice booming through hidden speakers. "You'll get roads, guns, power, everything. All I ask is loyalty." A single chair scraped back. President Kofi Nkrumah of Ghana, slim, sharp-eyed, wearing a plain Kent sash, rose slowly. Every lens followed him. He lifted one folder, turned it so everyone could read the secret page inside. U.S. companies to hold 51% of Ghana's oil blocks. Disputes judged only in American courts. Kofi's hand trembled, but his voice was steady. "My people did not fight colonial wars so I could sell them a newer chain," he said. One by one the other 12 leaders nodded. Folders snapped shut like iron gates. Trump's smile slipped. Reporters gasped. A tidal wave headline burst across the world that night. Trump's billions rejected by these 13 African countries. And yet, while the hall thundered with applause, 3 cold eyes watched Kofi from the shadows. An oil baron, a rogue general, and a foreign spy. A whisper slid between them, "Cut the roots and the tree will fall." If this moment stirs your heart, pause and tap the like button. It lets the truth travel farther than fear. 1 year earlier, the story had begun on a dusty village road in northern Ghana. Kofi, then a teacher-turned-activist, balanced on an old bicycle, notebooks flapping at his side. He asked every farmer the same simple question: "What does freedom taste like to you?" The answers were soft but fierce. "Clean water, seeds we own, a school that stays open." Kofi filled pages with their hopes, then carried those pages to Accra. He ran for office on the promise of sovereignty first. Crowds gathered under mango trees chanting, "No dignity, no deal." Children painted the words on cardboard and waved them like flags. Even elders who had lost faith smiled at the sight. Yet not everyone cheered. General Otieno, commander of the Regional Army Brigade, thought Kofi's talk was too bold. "Aid keeps our budgets alive," he muttered to a visiting American envoy. "Cut the strings and watch him dangle." Behind closed doors, money changed hands, plans were drawn. Tell us in the comments where you're listening from. Every voice matters in this growing circle of courage. Months passed. Phone lines buzzed from Washington to Accra. The new U.S. offer glittered. Roads, dams, military gear, billions worth. But the small print demanded U.S. control of oil wells and legal immunity for American troops. When the draft landed on Kofi's desk, he felt an old wound reopen, the same wound carved by colonial treaties that once sold gold for glass beads. He flew to Pretoria and found allies. South Africa's bold president, still angry at Trump's talk of white genocide, was ready to push back. Nigeria bristled at surrendering its delta riches. Kenya refused to let foreign judges rule Nairobi. Tanzania wanted vaccines, not secrets. Quiet phone calls became a map of resistance. 13 nations linked by one belief: Africa could stand tall without bending its neck. 2 nights before the Addis summit, Kofi walked alone by the Nile, torn between fear and duty. He remembered his father's last words: "You cannot drink respect from another man's cup, you must dig your own well." That night Kofi chose the well. Subscribe and share this story if you believe the time for Africa to rise is now. Dawn came. The summit began. Trump's entourage rolled in like a marching band of power suits and bright flags. Contracts were stacked like bricks on the table. But Kofi and his allies had rehearsed a different tune, the tune the world heard when the folders slammed shut. Applause still echoed when Kofi stepped outside for air. A black car crept close. Inside it, General Otieno's driver watched, engine humming. Far away, a single coded message lit up a satellite phone: "Proceed." The cheers inside the hall were loud, but Kofi could not hear the rumble gathering behind him, the sound of betrayal beginning to move. Will courage stand when daggers hide in daylight? The streets of Accra welcomed Kofi home like a son returned from war. Tens of thousands flooded Independence Square. Women ululated. Drummers pounded rhythms that hadn't been heard since the Pan-African Congress of '59. Someone raised a sign: "We are not for sale." Others followed. Soon the sky was filled with cardboard truths. Kofi raised his fist from the podium. "Africa is not a market. Africa is a mother. We do not auction mothers." The crowd roared. But while the nation sang, shadows gathered. General Otieno, sitting in a dark office at Burma camp, swirled whiskey in a glass. His aide, a man known only as Kweku 1, handed him a thin file marked with Kofi's name. Inside, surveillance photos, schedules, even a map of his morning jogging route. "Is it time?" the general asked. "Not yet," Kweku replied. "First we kill the people's hope." Backed by American corporate lobbyists and whispered funding from offshore accounts, Otieno launched the campaign. Billboards appeared overnight: "Reject poverty, accept progress." They carried smiling faces, roads stretching into the horizon, and the U.S. flag faint in the background. State media aired nightly debates, where actors posed as economists, warning that without the aid, schools would shut, salaries would vanish, and enemies would invade. A deepfake video was released showing Kofi allegedly taking bribes. It was clumsy work, but enough to stir doubt. If you've ever seen truth under attack, take a second to share this video. The more who see it, the less they can lie to us. But Kofi did not back down. He returned to the villages. Where drones couldn't follow, he walked. In Wa, he sat on cracked benches and listened to grandmothers speak of land stolen through development. In Tamale, he held the hands of cocoa farmers who had never seen a single coin from international trade. He cried with them. One night in Kumasi, under lantern light, he whispered, "They want us to believe we are weak. But if the ground grows food, the people are already rich." His voice spread like a healing wind. Radio hosts translated his speeches into dozens of dialects. Kids painted murals of him beside Kwame Nkrumah and Thomas Sankara. Old soldiers guarded his events, wearing their faded uniforms like armor. The people's resistance was no longer an idea, it had become a movement. But movements can make enemies bold. One rainy evening, as Kofi's convoy wound through a narrow forest road, a tree crashed down, blocking the path. Before the driver could reverse, headlights appeared behind them. Men in black masks jumped out, guns raised. Kofi's bodyguards acted fast. One was hit, another fired back. The shootout lasted 2 minutes. Then silence. The attackers melted into the trees. No one died that night, but the message was clear. Turn back, or the next tree will be your grave. Tell us in the comments, would you keep fighting if your life was on the line? What would you protect above all else? At dawn, Kofi stood before the nation again. His shirt was torn, blood on the sleeve. "They want me afraid," he said, voice thick with anger. "But how can I fear bullets when my people face hunger with empty hands every day? If I must fall, let me fall walking forward." This time the people didn't just cheer, they organized. In Tamale, students formed shield circles to guard Kofi's speeches. In Cape Coast, fisherfolk pledged daily watch patrols. In Accra, artists printed thousands of leaflets. 13 said "No. We are number 14. Even the international press, once silent, began asking questions. Who was behind the attack? Why were US-linked companies suddenly investing millions in rival politicians? The storm had begun to break. But betrayal wasn't finished yet. General Otieno changed tactics. If he couldn't kill Kofi's body, he'd poison his circle. One of Kofi's closest advisors, Minister Kojo Dapa, received a briefcase on his doorstep. Inside, $2 million, a new passport, and a simple note: "Flip the table." Kojo hesitated. He loved Kofi like a brother. But love can be fragile when temptation speaks in soft gold. The next day, documents were leaked showing irregularities in government spending. Documents traced back to Kojo's own ministry. Headlines screamed, "Mensa government faces corruption probe." Kofi was devastated. He was in my house. He knew my children's names. But he didn't flinch. Instead, he called a live press conference. "I will not hide behind lawyers or walls," he said, standing alone. "Investigate everything. If I am guilty, I will leave this office with dignity. But if I am not, then know this: I will return with fire in my bones." And return he did. A week later, the Anti-Corruption Commission cleared Kofi of all wrongdoing. The documents had been forged. Kojo Dapa had vanished, last seen boarding a private jet to Dubai. If this story gives you hope, don't just watch, be part of it. Subscribe and stand with those who still believe. As Kofi stood on the balcony of Jubilee House, watching thousands march with candles below, a voice called from behind him. It was his daughter, Amma, just 8 years old. She tugged his sleeve. "Daddy, why don't the big men want us to be free?" He knelt beside her. "Because freedom means they can't take things from us anymore." She nodded. "Then I'll be free forever." That night, as the fires of resistance burned high across the land, another message lit up Otieno's secure line. This one came from outside Africa. Final phase. Remove him. No delays. The battle for sovereignty had become a war for survival. And the final blow was now in motion. It began with silence. No warning. No speech. No protests. Just silence. The internet in Ghana went dark at 2:03 a.m. By 2:05, every radio signal in the capital dropped. Military convoys rolled through the streets, their headlights off, engines whispering like ghosts. People woke not from dreams but from the tremor in the earth as tanks rumbled past their homes. In the darkness, General Otieno executed his final plan. Operation New Dawn, drafted in a Washington think tank and rubber-stamped by a regional summit weeks earlier, was underway. They called it a constitutional reset. But everyone knew it was a coup. Inside Jubilee House, President Kofi Mensah stood alone, his most loyal guards already detained or missing. Outside his door, the faint sound of boots grew louder. He looked once at the portrait of Kwame Nkrumah on the wall, then down at his daughter's drawing on his desk, a crayon sun over a free Ghana. Then he took a breath so deep it might have reached the ancestors. "They're coming," whispered his aide. "We need to leave now." But Kofi shook his head. "If I run now, what do I tell Amma? That men with guns choose the future? No. Let them see me stand." At 2:24 a.m. the door burst open. Soldiers stormed in. Rifles raised. Kofi raised his hands. "I am the elected leader of this land. What you do now, you do not just to me, you do to Ghana." But they did not shoot. Instead, they bound his wrists, dragged him into a waiting van and disappeared into the night. By dawn, General Otieno stood at the same podium Kofi had once used to declare African dignity. Now he spoke the language of order, security, and international cooperation. Behind him, flags of the 13 African countries who had rejected Trump's billions hung limply, like conquered nations. But something was wrong. The people were silent. Too silent. In the northern town of Bolgatanga, a young boy climbed a rooftop with a handmade radio transmitter, built from spare parts. He tapped in a frequency, 107.3 FM. A voice crackled to life. A woman's voice. "This is the Free Ghana broadcast. President Kofi has been taken. But the people have not surrendered." Within hours, students hacked cell towers and blasted audio recordings of Kofi's speeches through old loudspeakers. Taxi drivers refused to work. Markets closed. Women marched with empty pots, banging them against the pavement, the traditional sound of revolt. Otieno ordered mass arrests. But the jails filled too fast. He sent soldiers to villages. But even his own men were now defecting, saying they would not shoot their mothers, their brothers, their people. One soldier, barely 19, stood before his commander and said, "I did not join the army to fight my own blood. Ghana is not for sale. If this moment moves you, like this video and share it." We must be louder than their silence. The world watched. But the usual statements never came. No calls for peace. No condemnations. Just silence from the same superpowers who had once promised democracy. What? Because the 13 African nations, led by Ghana, had done the unthinkable. They said no to Trump's money. No to his $5 billion energy for loyalty deal. No to hosting foreign troops under the pretense of security. No to mortgaging their land for phantom investments. Each nation had stood together in Accra, shoulder to shoulder with Kofi months before the coup. They had signed a pact. Not one of money, but of principle. A sovereign alliance. And that alliance now burned in the minds of every citizen who refused to kneel. From Nigeria to Namibia, from Senegal to South Africa, protests lit the continent. Kofi's face, once painted on walls, now became a symbol across oceans. In Paris, London, and New York, diaspora Africans held vigils. One little girl in Harlem stood holding a sign, "Free my president." Even some Western journalists began whispering the truth on late-night broadcasts. Was this really about democracy or about punishing Africa for dreaming free? Back in Ghana, resistance leaders launched Project Black Star, a final act of mass, coordinated defiance. On a signal, farmers dumped imported rice on the roads and returned to their local grains. Truckers blockaded the oil ports. Techies rerouted the internet through makeshift satellite hubs. The people had no weapons, but they had unity. Then one morning a broadcast cut through every channel. A grainy image appeared. Kofi Mensah, bruised but smiling. He stood in a concrete cell, hands behind his back. His voice steady. "They took me to break you. But I was never your power. You are. If I must rot here for Ghana to rise, I accept. But know this, freedom is not a gift. It is a choice. Choose it every day." The signal cut out. But it was enough. On the 5th day of the blackout, Otieno's forces began retreating. Some officers laid down arms. Others simply vanished. No one would fight a nation standing as one. The gates of the detention camp swung open at dawn on the 7th day. Kofi stepped out. 1,000,000 people waited in silence. Then one farmer knelt and whispered, "My president." The cry spread like wildfire, "My president." Kofi did not return to power with revenge. He returned with a pen. He signed into law a charter that locked foreign military bases out of Ghana forever. He nationalized key industries and handed them to local cooperatives. And he made it law that no external aid could ever come with conditions of control. But he also sent letters to the other 13 nations. Stand. Do not blink. We are one win now. And they did. From that day the Alliance of 13 became the bloc of the free. Africa had not only rejected billions. It had reclaimed its soul. If you believe the time for Africa to rise is now, subscribe and share this. Let our stories be louder than their lies. Let the world know, we are not for sale.